So, welcome everybody to our sixth Healing and Cancer podcast. We're here this evening with Nicki Durlester, who is a breast cancer survivor and also, in a sense, an expert on genetic cancer and its implication within families. We'll get to hear Nicki's just very inspiring story shortly enough. But it is Easter Sunday as well, and I just want to thank people for joining in and just really reflect. There's so much great wisdom and teaching within the Christian tradition, and so many people went through this weekend contemplating, what it was like to be back in ancient times in Easter Friday and losing this incredible spirit, incredible leader, and then not knowing what's going to happen in the resurrection on Sunday. I'm really touched by that story and the great wisdom and the many, many people who draw on the great teachings of Jesus and the Bible. So it's a wonderful day to offer this podcast. And I'm here with my dear friend, Dr. Timothy Walker, who's a psychotherapist and a brilliant teacher himself. And how are you doing, Tim? Maybe a reflection from your week. Do you have something that you learned or something that inspired you from your week serving other people?
Well, I'm inspired by music and inspired by listening to music and cooking tonight, actually. Feeling the sun coming back. We had a sun shower with sun and snow all at the same time. That was like the sun shining through and the little glistening droplets of snow. So that's just very recently.
Wow.
So that inspired me. And in my work, I do have a lot of, in particular, some young people who are struggling with cancer and with trying to integrate back into their lives. And that notion of that your life gets shattered and broken, and then you have to find out who you are now, find out a new normal or a new you or a resurrection, a new person coming out of a phoenix out of the ashes. So I think that's a theme for a lot of people that I work with and a lot of people with cancer as well.
Wonderful, yes. And it is the resurrection. It is the day of resurrection. So before we get to meet our wonderful guest, I'm wondering, Tim, if you can offer an opening, for instance, prayer or meditation or a setting of intention, something that will ground people in the here and now and just really set a good intention for this podcast and our lives forward afterwards.
Yeah, let's do that. So we can begin with a meditation and establish our sense of groundedness, feeling our bodies, and feeling our connection to the earth below, that sense of groundedness, practical reality, the way the earth nourishes our bodies. And feel that in the present moment. And then we can feel our breath connecting with the life force. Feeling what we feel in the moment, acknowledging that whatever it is we can accommodate, whatever energy is flowing through our body. And sensing above us wide open sky. That sense of open sky is the possibilities of infinite healing, transformation, change. And sitting between heaven and earth, breathing, we can acknowledge with a sense of gratitude and appreciation what a miracle this life is. With each breath, In a sense, we are bringing heaven to earth, embodying spirit in this life. And deep within all of us, in the human heart, there is this wellspring of inspiration and kindness and love that we can access. Halfway between the practical earth and our busy lives with family and dealing with cancer or our loved ones, and this sense of inspiration or infinite space, open sky, stars in the infinite universe. We can find inspiration. And in a sense, just as in the story of the resurrection, we can rise again. Whatever it is that we're going through, whatever inner weather we are enduring, emotional, physical, social, family problems, issues, we can settle our mind, come into our heart, and from our heart we can rise again. We can again connect with our true nature. And feeling that radiating, that powerful sense of love and healing, from that perspective we can set an intention for ourselves, for healing and transformation, and extend that out to others. Whoever will listen to this, and whoever is out there struggling and suffering, we can extend our hearts out and out and out. Setting that intention and radiating it out, we can then let go and trust. Feel our body and our breath relax into our own innate presence. Good, thank you.
Thank you. So happy Easter, Nicki. I just want to acknowledge that that actual setting of intention really and somehow describes your life. You have such a great heart, and you've really taken your story, taken your wisdom, and shared it with so many others and helping in their journey. But that's maybe just a preview of the bigger story. Nicki, do you want to just introduce yourself in terms of how you connected with the cancer world, and just some of the story that you want to share on that part of it?
Well, I'm from a big Italian family.
Mm.
My grandmother was one of 18. My mother was one of 11. And we don't know anything about the relatives that are still in Caropoli, Italy, which is where my mother's family's from. I do hope to get there someday. But my mother, as I said, was one of 11, and there were 8 girls and 3 boys, and 7 out of the 8 women had breast, ovarian, or fallopian tube cancer. A few of them were diagnosed in their 30s, early 40s. My mother was diagnosed at 43 with breast cancer. And I was 5 when she was diagnosed. So I've lived my whole life with breast cancer hanging over my head or being a part of my vernacular at a young age. But back then, my mother was diagnosed in 1962. when all of these women fell like dominoes, being Roman Catholic, they thought maybe there was a curse on our family. It's just how people thought back then. But we were very fortunate that in the 70s we were approached by the National Institute of Health in the United States, and we participated in a study that included over 100 families, and we were the third largest. Most of the sisters were gone by then. Some of the brothers were still alive, but they were able to get tumor samples, and then we all participated. The 34 first cousins, the children of the 11, participated in the study, and it took them over 20 years until 2001 to finally find out that the malignancies in our family were linked to a BRCA2 mutation.
Wow, a genetic abnormality that was passed along in the family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But they thought maybe it was environmental, maybe it was the silly curse, but I don't think anybody really thought it could have been something that was hereditary.
Yeah.
And we suspect that it was passed down by my grandfather, my mother's father, because as you know, it can be passed down on the paternal or the maternal side. He passed away from lung cancer, which is not linked to the mutation, but my mother's mother died young from heart disease, so we just suspect it came from him.
Yeah.
So, the point was, my mother died when I was 20. After she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she actually was well for about 10 years. And then when I was 15, she was diagnosed with fallopian tube cancer, and she died when I was 20, when I was a junior in college.
Wow.
But, so I divide my life into two halves. And anything that happened before age 20 sometimes feels like something I read about in a book because it was so long ago. I'm 58 years old now. I've lived much more of my life without my mother. But it all came bubbling to the surface when I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 52. So all these memories I tucked away very neatly, compartmentalized them, walked around life seeming happy-go-lucky. I don't really feel like I lived my life under a dark cloud, although my husband might disagree. But yeah, because you don't get away from your childhood. But when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I was kind of shocked by my reaction to my diagnosis because I've always thought of myself as a very strong woman, spiritually grounded. Yeah. But I completely fell apart. I crawled in bed and I pulled the covers over my head.
Yeah. Well, do you think it was some of the memories from your childhood and kind of those feelings that you kept all of those years? What was happening, do you think, at that point in your life?
Yeah, I think that I finally realized what those 7 women, my aunts and my mother, went through. Unless you walk in someone's moccasins, I don't think you can get it.
Yeah.
And then for me, I was filled with regret because I had had the opportunity to have a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy, and I chose not to. I chose to practice active surveillance instead, thinking that if diagnosed, it would be stage 0. And then when it was determined that I was stage 2 and had traveled to 1 node, I was incredulous. Like, how can that happen when I was being followed every 6 months?
Yeah, so closely. So a real disappointment in some sense that you thought you might be able to kind of beat the system by watching very closely.
Oh, yeah, and I indulged in uber self-flagellation.
Yeah.
Like, it's my fault. I could have done something about it. I chose not to. So kind of you get what you deserve, which is very silly to think that way. So I had to work through a lot of emotions. And I think the greatest lesson I learned in the process was self-forgiveness.
Right. Yeah, it is the critical skill in some sense that we all need to learn and to realize that we're just human, right? And that we did the best we could in that circumstance. I mean, heck, your kids were probably even grown by that point, right? So it's not as though you were compromising their childhoods either. So
that is a very good point. And my daughter was a junior in college, the same college that I went to, and that was the year my mother died. So she was, anyway. And my son was a freshman at that same school. So they were away at school. They didn't have to see any of this. And so I felt good about the fact that their childhood was intact. They had a happy childhood. They weren't surrounded by cancer. They didn't lose relatives to this disease. So if anything, I'm very grateful to God that they didn't live through what I lived through. Because I just truly believe that we all are our childhoods. There's no getting away from it.
Right. We carry that programming in some sense with us through our life, right? And how we interact with the world. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. You must have felt, I mean, the mother's greatest concern, though, is what I've seen as a cancer specialist is someone who's diagnosed with a breast cancer, they often worry about their family actually more than themselves. And, you know, so even though your kids were at college, you still must have just had that incredible, you know, what effect is this going to have in their lives?
Well, for me, that worry about my children started in 2001 when I tested positive for the mutation, because I knew that each of my children had a 50-50 chance of inheriting that from me. So I tormented myself. But then as the years went by and I passed the age my mother was when she was diagnosed, which was 43, with each passing year, I thought, well, maybe I'm going to be in that lucky 13% that does not get diagnosed with hereditary breast and ovarian cancer. I had had a total hysterectomy at 34 because I didn't want to, the screening techniques for ovarian cancer to this day are terrible. And that's such a stealthy opponent that I thought, you know, and that probably delayed the onset of my breast cancer, having my ovaries and fallopian tubes removed so young. But in 2001, you know, I was beside myself that, you know, the mutation did not end with my mother, that I had it, and now I may have passed it on to my children. So, but with each passing year, I kind of became more confident that, you know, maybe the fact that we lived clean and this pristine diet and we exercised like maniacs and we were positive people and we took supplements, we did everything right, that maybe, you know, we could beat this. And then when I was diagnosed, my daughter suddenly realized that this is real.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and so she tested a year after I was diagnosed, and she tested positive. And I can't tell you how that made me feel in words. I mean, it was devastating that I felt guilty. I felt, you know, if there was anything I could have done to prevent it, I obviously would have. My daughter placed no blame. She was very pragmatic about it at first. No big deal, Mom. I'm going to take care of it. We're going to end our history of breast cancer. I'll have my breast removed. You know, almost like it was not, you know, but then, you know, she went through a very tough time and she had an emotional breakdown. So it's like we had to go through a lot of healing. And then 3 years after that, she did have a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy at 26. And it was a day of liberation for us, really. When I have a tape of when she woke up and what she said to me in that moment. You know,
wow.
I feel like she did it for me sometimes more than for herself.
Wow. Well, yeah, to wake up and to be actually starting the healing at that point, even though you've had this massive surgery, it's still, there's a lot of kind of physical healing ahead, but you've taken that step and the risk is basically taken care of in some sense. So
you kind of lift the weight of the world from your shoulders. You know, she wrote a piece, and it's all about taking back her life. You know, she knew there was something she could do to dramatically reduce her risk. You know that it's never 0% chance. She still has a small chance, but much less than the general population. But it was so empowering for her, really.
Wow.
Yeah, you could just see it. You could see the euphoria and, you know, the weight of the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she went through a lot to get to that point, so bless her for, I mean, also you can kind of grow up much faster with that kind of issue around your head. And at age 23, when she's first finding out about this, and then within 3 years taking a major decision. So really, I mean, she's obviously a very special person to be able to take that transformation and make that decision so young in her life. It's really quite incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I was happy because there are women that are rushing out now and having these surgeries when they find out that they have a BRCA mutation. But she took 3 years and she did thorough due diligence. You know, met with the experts, started with a genetic counselor, which is so key in this process, and also spent a lot of time with a therapist. You know, wrapping her head around it, trying to prepare herself and anticipate how she would feel afterwards. So I think she did her homework and she built this rock solid foundation for herself before she moved forward. So I'm very grateful, very grateful.
Wow. I mean, I think we can maybe even unpack this conversation more fully, and just because First of all, I know that you've written a very precious book called Beyond the Pink Moon. It really describes your story and your history going through a breast cancer diagnosis and then having to work with your family and seeing your daughter going through this and so on. And you've also created a Facebook group by the same name, Beyond the Pink Moon, which now has 3,700 members and so on. And then lastly, there's these stories. This one, it's a fabulous story. So there's the Pink Moon Lovelies, which is a story, a book that you've kind of edited of 50 women from around the world who've worked with genetic cancer mutation diagnosis and how it's influenced their lives. And a lot of healing through story. And so I just want to first of all just congratulate you. It's wonderful that you've been able to take this very, very difficult experience and in some sense extend your heart and help and kindness and wisdom to so many other people. But I'm hoping, given that you've done all of that, let's kind of go back to back to that moment and maybe just add some advice or give some stories around when you're first diagnosed with a breast cancer diagnosis. Maybe somebody like yourself who decided to go active surveillance and then boom, you're working with a breast cancer diagnosis, and suddenly you're feeling, what did my grandmothers go through, or what did my aunts go through, and just how overwhelming that could be, and some of the emotions that were coming up. So maybe to be able to describe that may help other people and make them feel less isolated by kind of taking us through a little more step by step what happened from a kind of emotional, spiritual perspective.
For me, the day I was diagnosed, I remembered it was March 31st, 2009. Phone rings. My radiologist on the other line tells me I have garden variety breast cancer, which didn't sound so terrible to me at the moment. But all of a sudden, I was 5 years old again.
Mm.
It was the craziest thing. Here I am. I'm a 52-year-old adult woman, and all of a sudden I'm 5, and I remember my mother hearing that same news. I have very vivid memories. I know it's probably hard to believe that I remember back when I was 5. But, and that's what the book actually starts with my mother. I weaved her story with mine. Because my earliest memories of her coming home from the hospital from her radical mastectomy, back then it was very different. So it was that flood of memories, and that's when I said I crawled in bed and pulled the cover over. My husband was, what's happening? It's like that was so out of character for me. I just sat and I sobbed. It's like,
yeah, and because you're a high-powered leader, running your own consulting firm, working with executives, with searches and so on. So very, very powerful personality, and suddenly you're human like the rest of us, which is suffering these emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, wow, I thought I did everything right, short of removing my breasts. And the reason I did not remove my breasts is my dad died of colon cancer, so I rationalized, like, how many parts can you remove? I'll get my checkups, I'll live a healthy life. It's okay, boom, you have no control. The control is taken. It feels like blunt force trauma when someone tells you you've been diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
And the best advice I got was from a friend of mine who was a survivor who called me immediately and said, "This isn't a death sentence. Snap out of it." You're still that same girl. You still have that same grit, determination, and feel sorry for yourself for a day or so, but you have to arm yourself with a plan and keep moving forward.
Right.
That was really the best. You feel very out of control when you don't have the plan.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't know what type of cancer you have. So you're thinking, oh my God, is it triple negative? Is it hormone positive? Is it HER2 positive, HER2 negative? There's all these variables.
Yeah.
And then, once you find your team, which is so important, finding the right physicians that you can have a relationship with and trust, finding your team and then arming yourself with your treatment plan and your surgical plan, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Makes sense. The other thing that Tim and I teach and try to work with is this balancing point between allowing yourself to feel those difficult emotions, not kind of repressing or discarding or trying to bypass, but at the same time, you're proactive in saying, this is my treatment plan. So in some sense, how do you find that place to say, geez, I do want to grieve this. I do want to feel badly. I do want to have my good cry here. And then when do you know to kind of step forward and use the grit that your friend is talking about?
But, I'm very lucky, number one, that I can afford the resources that I was able to tap into. I wish every woman could have what I had. I mean, I've worked for years with an acupuncturist. I've worked for years with a craniosacral chiropractor. When I was 34, it's like a whole sob story here, who wants to hear it? I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And that was a good slap for me, because I've always said, for me, MS was like more shit. My whole life I worried about getting cancer. And then, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I was diagnosed with something else. And so I really did a lot of growing with that, that's for sure. And at that time, surrounded myself with a healthcare team that through the years has really kind of kept me in check. They know me. They know how to work with me. I also, there was a whole spiritual transformation, too, that really helped to heal me that it's hard to put into words, that happened to me one day when I happened to stop by a church after getting good news about my mamma print, which is a gene assay that predicts your risk of recurrence. And the doctors I met with said they didn't think it would come back favorable, and it did. And my first inclination was to go to a Catholic church right by my plastic surgeon's office, and I hadn't been in a Catholic church in over 20 years. And it's hard to put into words what happened to me that day in that church, but it was like a total healing, cleansing. I was alone, but I was not alone in that church.
Wow.
I really felt God's presence, the Blessed Mother, my parents, and it opened me up. And talk about the floodgates,
Well, and the floodgates were the emotional tears coming out, and the healing, and the letting go, and the everything.
It was because I never ever prayed. I mean, I always pray. I never prayed to God for a cure, but I always prayed to have strength, grace, courage, just to get through it. That's all I wanted, was to have that. And my first reaction when I got that call was to run to church to show my gratitude to God. It just hard to explain. I just felt so grateful that I was given this blessing.
And I wonder, I mean, Nicki, we've decided beforehand that you would offer a poem during the podcast, and I'm wondering if this is the appropriate point, because in some sense it's about grace and the fact that there is a God in our lives, in some sense, however you want to envision it, and that we can connect with that greater spirit. It's there for us.
Well, I hope it helps you. A friend of mine sent me one of Anne Lamott's books when I was recovering. And I had not read any of her writings, so I immediately went online, because I'm, lunatic about everything in life, to Google her and learn everything I could about Anne Lamott. And I stumbled upon this interview that she gave, and this hit a spiritual chord with me. The question she was asked, I hope you don't mind, I have to read it, was, what does grace mean for you, and how can we better communicate it to each other? This was her response. Grace is that extra bit of help when you think you are really doomed. Also, not coincidentally, when you have finally run out of good ideas on how to proceed and on how better to control the people or circumstances that are frustrating or defeating you. I experience grace as a cool ribbon of fresh air when I feel spiritually claustrophobic. Sometimes I experience it as water wings, something holding me up when I am afraid that I'm going down or the tide is carrying me away. I know that grace meets us wherever we are, but does not leave us where it found us. Sometimes it is too small, a couple of seconds relief here, several extra inches there. I wish it was big and obvious, like skywriting. Oh well. Grace is not something I do or can chase down, but it is something I can receive. And I stop trying to be in charge. We communicate grace to one another by holding space for people when they are hurt or terrified, instead of trying to fix them or manage their emotions for them. We offer ourselves as silent companionship or gentle listening when someone feels very alone. We get people glasses of water when they are thirsty.
Mm.
And that, to me, is grace. And if I could just read one last thing to you, because this really speaks to me on Easter Sunday. God has no other hands than ours. If the sick are to be healed, it is our hands, not God's, that will heal them. If the lonely and frightened are to be comforted, it is our embrace, not God's, that will comfort them. The warmth of the sun travels on air, but the warmth of God's love can only travel through each of us.
Mm. Beautiful.
Wow. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. The lots of different reflections there. One of the skills that Tim and I teach during the weekend retreats is essentially cognitive therapy or reframing. And we take people through an exercise in which we look at their thoughts and how their thoughts influence their emotions. And one of the thoughts that we work with is the thought, I can't do this, I don't have the strength to get through this, that type of thing. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And people reframe that in different ways. They're going through chemotherapy. They may think, well, I've gone through this so far. This is helping me. I just have to take a day at a time, et cetera, et cetera. But the reframe that Tim and I actually came up with, not to say it's the best reframe, is sometimes just to stop and let go and kind of give in to the situation, not try to control the situation, is the kind of the circumstance or the conditions that we can set to allow God's grace to touch us, to realize that it's here with us all the time. So it was such a lovely poem. I just want to thank you for, first of all, and the second reading as well is just absolutely wonderful.
I'm sorry.
So, Nicki, where did that second one come from?
Oh, it was from Rabbi Kirshner.
Yes.
Just a little background. I was raised Roman Catholic. I married a conservative Jewish man. The deal was that we were going to raise our children Jewish. He did not ever ask me to convert because he doesn't believe in conversion. Again, you are your childhood. That's just his philosophy. So I, though, for 20 years, for the most part, practiced Judaism with them. We belonged to a Reformed temple because, being a mixed marriage, we could not belong to conservative. Our children went to all Jewish day school, from mommy and me through high school. And that's why this was a very big deal when I was diagnosed, that I stopped by that church that day. And I went back to my roots. And it was just, and my husband's been so great about it, and my children, so supportive. I think they feel like I compromised for a lot of years, and I gave them a strong foundation in their Jewish faith. But that's not who I'm Catholic, like I'm Italian. It's just the way I was raised, and it all came back again. I didn't expect that to happen to me. I really didn't. So.
And that moment that you went into the church, it was a moment of gratitude that initiated that grace that you received. Is that right?
There was a moment of gratitude about that mamma print that came back with a low risk of recurrence score. I just couldn't believe it. And my plastic surgeon's office was about a block from the Church of the Good Shepherd. And this was in Beverly Hills. And, I stopped by and there was no one in the church. I don't ever recall being in a church alone before. And I just sat down in the first pew, and all I can tell you is I was not alone. There was something much greater than I in that church that day. And I felt as though, I believe I was in God's presence, the Blessed Mother who I've prayed to since I was a little girl. I felt everything. I felt my parents' love. I felt God's love. I didn't feel alone anymore. And it gave me a strength like I've never had, I feel, in my life. Because when I was young, I would go to church with my mother every day, and I would look at her, and she would just look so, pious, holy, so dialed into it all, and I just wasn't feeling it. It just wasn't. I studied it, I memorized, all of that, but it just never clicked with me until really that day in the Church of the Good Shepherd. And I suppose I could have been in a temple or a mosque or anywhere, really, but I was in a Catholic church, so that became my ritual, and I started going back to Mass every week. And from there, I went to confession, and that was a whole other cleansing of major proportions, and kind of letting everything out. Yeah, it was very good for me.
It's nice that you've been able to re-experience it from a real adult place of choice.
Thank you. It was
Yes.
not a choice when I was a child. It was,
Yeah.
yeah. I kind of did the same thing to my children that my parents did to me. I sent them to all parochial schools.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It can be too much, and it can feel like brainwashing, and then you gravitate away. But it's always in there, so.
And I'm wondering, with that experience that you had in the church and now the work that you're doing, how do you see the connection between that kind of spiritual inspiration that you've received and that sense of grace and now the work that you're doing to bring that help to others?
I know this sounds completely crazy because I never wrote really. I mean, I wrote from a business perspective my whole career, but I had never written a book or anything, a short story. My life. But anyway, my daughter was living with us at the time because she graduated from college with us. She and her dad went out of town for a week. This was the February after I was diagnosed. So I was diagnosed in March, following February. I sat down, I wrote Beyond the Pink Moon in a few days. It was like a voice was coming through me, that's all I can tell you. And I put it all down on paper. I truly wrote it selfishly as a catharsis for myself, number one. And then I thought to myself, if it could help one other survivor, that would be priceless to me. So I thought maybe my family would read it, and that's it. And then one of my friends sent me an article about self-publishing, of all things. And in the article was the name of April Hamilton. She's very well known in self-publishing circles. So I thought, I'll write to her and see if she can help me, because I knew nothing about designing a book cover or anything about it. She wrote back to me in 15 minutes and said, I was just diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
I felt that April was the person I was supposed to help, never thinking this would go any further. And she read my memoir. It's a short story, really. You could read it in an hour and a half. And she said, this is no New York Times bestseller, but I think more than a few people are going to read this. So, we published it through Create Space, and I uploaded it online, and through word of mouth, truly just a word of mouth labor of love, and a little bit of help from my publicist. I'm lucky I have a friend that's a publicist. She got me a little bit of press, but really it was just word of mouth labor of love. It ended up, reaching a lot of places. I started a Facebook group by the same name, and as Dr. Rutledge said, we have close to 3,700 members now. We're in 30 countries. Beyond the Moon ended up going around the world. I'm very grateful for that. And from that group, I selected 50 people who told their stories, and I compiled them into a second book. And we were very lucky because Dr. Christy Funk wrote the foreword of that book. She's my doctor. And shortly after that book came out, news broke about Angelina Jolie having a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy. And so we were very fortunate to kind of ride the coattails, the timing of that. People became very interested in BRCA.
Yes.
BRCA mutation. So the Pink Moon Lovelies, Empowering Stories of Survival, was an Amazon bestseller and has done very well. Very grateful. Just a group of women who told their stories and we put it out there.
Right, and helped a lot of people while doing it as well. How do you look at this kind of? I would say it's synchronicity if you want to use the non-Christian term, but there's a little bit of fate there, perhaps, that you had decided to write the book at the same time that your publicist friend was diagnosed with breast cancer. So how do you? Does God have a will that you're tapping into, or how do you kind of see your purpose in life from your Christian perspective?
Well, I think that I just felt throughout the process I was feeling led. And it's hard to put into words, hard to intellectualize it. Some people are open to hearing about it, others really, I don't think they believe it. I think they think that a lot of people, when they're diagnosed with a serious illness, suddenly find God. But he was always a constant in my life, always. It's just that for a lot of years, I went to temple. I worshipped with my rabbi. I went to carpool Torah. I was still, very devout in my faith. It just kind of took a little turn there. But I do feel that I was meant to go to that church that day, and I was meant to find April Hamilton. Of all things, why would somebody send me that article? I knew nothing about this world, nothing about publishing. And then for her to take on the project and encourage me throughout the process. I didn't want to start a Facebook page. I thought Facebook was for my children. I didn't want to do that. I knew not. And very interesting, the first year I had that page, I had about 35 members, and they were all my family. And then one day, I thought to myself, I should be doing something with this. So I went online and I typed in BRCA, and BRCA Sisterhood popped up on Facebook. And I spoke to the administrator of that group, and she allowed me to post my book in her group. And then I held a lottery and said I would give away 10 free books for anybody that would join my group, and the rest is history.
That was a good marketing ploy.
I mean, my business background, but really, it brought these women to me, and some of those women are in the second book. I felt that for that while it was languishing, it kept like eating away at me that I should be doing more. It wasn't enough to just to touch 1, 2, 3, 4. Try to reach as many people as possible.
And in some sense, I think you're listening to God at that point, right? Because you're really, in you're God's hands. It's what the second reading is all about. And how can we use our spirit and our love to bring God's grace into the world is really the issue there. I do want to touch back to, because this is a great opportunity to talk about being a mom to somebody who has a BRCA mutation, and maybe just kind of digging into that issue just a bit more, because I do want you to share a little bit of your story so that somebody listening to the podcast could gain some insight and maybe some resources as to how they can work with their own family members.
Yeah, and sometimes family members are not open. That's the thing.
Yeah. Yep.
With my daughter, she's such a take charge woman. There's no, first of all, I was too afraid, truthfully, to have the prophylactic bilateral mastectomy. I was afraid of general anesthesia. How crazy is that? When I had my total hysterectomy, I had a spinal because I was too afraid to have general. But with the bilateral mastectomy, there's no choice. So fear, 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 always in my life. Really. Yeah. Fear, ran my life in many ways. And the very thing that I was afraid of the most, getting breast cancer, I allowed to happen because I was so afraid to have the surgery, and in the end I had to have the surgery anyway. So my daughter watched all this, and she learned from the choices that I made. I don't call them mistakes, because without my diagnosis I would never have written my memoir. We wouldn't be sitting here right now, and so I feel grateful for that. But my daughter definitely, she's the type of person to take care of something, move on with her life. So as I mentioned, she started with a genetic, first was tested through Christy Funk, and then met with a genetic counselor, and from there. But just to tell your listening audience, the people that should think about getting genetic testing or would qualify for it is anyone who has ovarian cancer or fallopian tube cancer in their family at any age. Breast cancer at 50 or younger, breast cancer in both breasts at any age, breast cancer and ovarian cancer, male breast cancer, triple-negative breast cancer, and Ashkenazi Jewish descent with breast cancer before 60. So those are the people that should be talking to their primary care physicians or gynecologists, and then asking to meet with a genetic counselor. And clearly anyone that has more than one relative on either side, paternal or maternal, with ovarian cancer, fallopian tube, prostate, pancreatic, or melanoma, should have that conversation.
Yeah, so that's definitely the groups, and kind of the idea is to raise the awareness, really, through all medium to get that message out there, and then to encourage people to have the conversation with their geneticist or their team member. So there are obviously pros and cons to moving forward and so on.
I also recommend that people get psychological counseling through this.
Yeah, very much so. Because there's big implications. Now, one question I have is, do you involve your family members in making that decision? Should I go get tested? Like, instead of just doing it yourself, making a decision by yourself, do you ask your family members first to kind of make a group decision, or how does that pan out in the real world?
Well, in our family, it was a group decision with my daughter. I mean, she led the way. I had hoped that I thought she had more time, and I thought at 23 she wasn't mature enough to deal with the potential ramifications of a positive test. And as I mentioned before, initially it was like, no big deal. There's a solution to this problem. I'm going to take care of it, and I'm going to move on happily with my life. But then one day, out of nowhere, a child who's never had any anxiety truly in her life had a major panic attack. And from that, truly had an emotional breakdown and needed a lot of assistance, and with medication, with therapy. And because to face that mortality, that this newfound mortality, at some type, I think at some point you're going to pay the piper with the psychological impact that it has, emotional impact, whether it's then or later in your life. And I'm glad that she worked through that with professionals, with us. We so much love, support, and then eventually she got to the place where she felt strong enough and was certain she wanted to have the surgery.
Right. Yeah, and I just want to say that it's normal to go through the incredible anxiety. We within the society get the impression that we have to be positive and happy all the time, but the fact is, when people are dealing with these kind of life and death decisions, it's normal to have the great difficulties. And then the wonderful part of the story, if there is a wonderful part of that story, is that she was able then to tap into a number of resources that could help her grow psychologically and mature through this. And that's the other part of it, is to have the strength to say, I need help. I need to tap into the experts to get me through this difficult circumstance. And so God bless her as well in that whole story.
And then she also tapped back into her Jewish foundation. It kind of led her back, for a while she worked for Dr. Funk as the program director of Pink Lotus Petals, which is the nonprofit arm of Pink Lotus Breast Center. So she did that for a year, and while she was recovering from her bilateral mastectomy, the private Jewish high school she attended recruited her to work for them. It was the perfect timing because it helped her to heal. She was back in touch with her rabbis, back in touch with her Jewish community, which was so welcoming and supportive, because 1 in 40 Jewish women have this mutation, as you know, Ashkenazi Jewish women. So Allie was able to educate her community, I feel, and in return, they loved her, encouraged her, supported her through this time in her life. And now she goes to temple every Friday night again. It's her hour a week of meditation, and fills up her spiritual bank. And she's just a lot lighter these days. I can tell that.
Wow.
You said something earlier that when she woke up from her surgery, can you kind of give a little more detail about that?
Oh, I wish I could show you the video. It's so incredible. She's kind of in a drug stupor, but she said it was the happiest, best day of her life. She actually said she was euphoric, because you're so grateful you get through the surgery and you wake up, right? So that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Rough surgery, and she was so happy for me that she could end what she believed. She believed she ended the history of breast cancer in our family by making this preemptive strike. She felt empowered. She took advantage and took the opportunity that I did not take. You never want to hear that you have a breast cancer diagnosis, if there's something that you can do to prevent it. And I think for her it was probably the defining moment in her life. And I think being able to do that, having the strength to make that preemptive strike, I think Allie knows she'll be able to do anything to get through life now. Any challenges she faces, I know she'll be able to draw from within. I do. I believe she Because we're the kind of family that likes to optimistic all the time, glasses overflowing. But that's not life. That's not real. That's not authentic. Nobody gets through this life unscathed. And I may have been able to tuck away those memories from the first 20 years of my life,
Mm-hmm.
They all came back because I never really dealt with them. I just compartmentalized them neatly.
Yeah. Yeah, that little 5-year-old girl who dealt with your mother's first diagnosis, just was right there to be healed when you heard your news. And I
Yeah,
think that happens a lot for people.
you do? Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that before in our programs. People who experience their parents' cancer, then when they get cancer, it all kind of like fuses into one emotional experience. And I think it's important to recognize that the shock of that little girl, the little girl doesn't know how to cope with that intensity of emotion, and
No, and
so
oh, sorry.
it needs to be readdressed from a place of adult consciousness, which is what you ended up doing.
Yeah, I mean, it just felt that with the MS, I was very lucky, and I've had a benign case of MS, very, very lucky. But I just felt like this was something. Well, this was something that did take the lives of the women in my family.
Mm.
So I almost felt like it was predestined for me. I was going to walk in my mother's footsteps. I'm now the age she was when she passed away. So this birthday, turning 58, once again, total mess. It's like, what is happening again? Thought I dealt with all this stuff. It's like, wow, I actually took note of the day that I lived one day longer than my mother did. I don't know if that's normal or not,
No,
but I actually computed it.
yeah, yeah.
So it was Halloween of last year.
Oh, yeah.
So, my mother died at 58, her father died at 58, my other grandfather died at 58. So 58 has loomed, I wrote about this in my book, 58 has loomed so large in my life. So I really had to go through tons of positive affirmations that did not have to be my destiny, just because it was theirs. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff to work through.
Yeah, and that's a grace on some level that you've been able to receive.
That it's okay. That it is
Yeah,
okay to live longer than your mother did. It's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, and just hats off to you as well, just with the diagnosis of MS, that you really decided to take care of yourself, right? Some people just don't get to that step to see that their life is sacred, that this is a wonderful opportunity to bring God's love into the world. And sometimes you do that by empowering yourself, by going to your chiropractor, by getting the craniosacral, by living that extremely healthy lifestyle. You did all those things, and now you have this opportunity to give back in some sense. And I think that's the wonder and grace of this story right now.
But again, I was just so blessed though, because not everyone has the resources that I had.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've worked very hard for everything that I have. So does my husband. But I wish that everyone could have the opportunities that I've had. I don't know why I'm so blessed, and I appreciate it very much. That I can afford, to have this team of healthcare professionals that work with me to keep me healthy.
Yeah.
I think the most of the work though comes from me.
Yeah, setting the intention. So no matter which country you live in, you may not have access to all those things, or you may not have the financial resources to have all those things, but it's just the kind of affirmation is the starting point, the setting of the intention to say, I want to live, I want to be healthy, I want to share God's love in my life. And that to me is more powerful than any particular technique, any particular practitioner that you go to. It's really that's the prayer in some sense, is the affirmation. So
It's very true. I think it's you have to allow yourself. There's a line, and will sound a little crazy, from a movie called Perks of the Wallflower. It's also a book, but it's the line is, we accept the love that we think we deserve, and that applies to God's love too.
That's right.
We accept the love we think we deserve, and I'm worthy of His love. I'm a flawed human being.
yes.
I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Yes, I have regrets. But I mentioned to you that I'd gone to confession after 30 years. This is after I went to that church that day.
It was a long first episode.
Oh, wow. And I sat down with this priest who's from Ireland, and he was well into his 80s. I went to the confessional, and it wasn't, I could see him. I was used to the confessional where you went in, you don't see the priest, it's dark, but I could see him on the other side, bawling my eyes out, confessing all my sins. Not that I'm a terrible person, but, I made my mistakes. And, he was amazing. He went over all the commandments with me. And then, I thought, oh, I'm definitely going to get excommunicated for sure. He just said, you know what, I want you to go out there and sit in front of the statue of the Blessed Mother, talk to her. And 3 months from now, I want you to come back again and talk to me. And it was so healing to go through each commandment, realize that I was not a horrible human being. And I think that day helped me with some self-forgiveness.
Yes.
It did.
And then when you forgive yourself, you allow yourself to receive more love, right?
I think you allow yourself to receive God's love. And for me, the Blessed Mother, a lot of Catholics, she's your home girl. I feel like she's always had my back. I know there are people that say, why do you pray to her? You should pray directly to God. Well, she was God's mother, and I have such respect for women and mothers everywhere that I figure she can get his ear for me in case he's not listening. I don't know. I love the Blessed Mother. I'm devoted, so.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Hope that makes sense to the both of you.
Oh, yeah. I think it's powerful. I think the feminine is, been lost in a lot of spirituality, and it's wonderful to bring it back whatever way you can. And I've been to Mexico with and been around the Our Lady of Guadalupe energy, which I really respect tremendously.
Yes, me too. I pray to her actually at church. Catholics, we have our statues and our saints, but I always pray to the Lady of Guadalupe.
Mm-hmm.
Nicki, is there anything else that you want to share as we're kind of going to our last meditation? Is there anything else on your mind that you want to share with the audience?
I just want women to know that, receive this diagnosis, that they're not alone. And, if they're not getting what they need, I hope that they do from their families and their close friends. But again, it goes back to, unless someone has walked in your shoes, they can't get it. There are so many support groups available to breast cancer and ovarian cancer survivors and BRCA previvors. Beyond the Pink Moon is just one of them on Facebook. And, sometimes it's easier to have this veil of anonymity, and be in a support group where you're not sitting in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
You're safely behind a computer screen, so you can really vent and let it all hang out.
Yeah.
Nobody's judging. We're there to offer encouragement, support, lift each other up with prayer. We have a weekly prayer list that we keep going every day. That's important. And we have everybody, Buddhists, Catholics, Jews, we're all just one big happy family. But I just want women to know that there is help out there, and they should not go through this journey alone. It's not a death sentence. Yes, it feels like blunt force trauma, but once armed with a plan, you move forward with your life. And hopefully it ends up being a blip on the radar screen of your life, and it doesn't define who you are. Hopefully it will empower you. I don't think it's a gift, but I think you can receive many blessings because of it.
There's that opportunity to bring, the best, to connect with the family, to allow your love into the world, however that is. So, and just to reflect in the background of your, in your room there is family is eternal, or that's lovely. Yeah.
You got it. Family to me is everything. I have my family, the Durlesters, the Italians, the Jews. Then I have my global family of Beyond the Pink Moon. But long after we're gone, our essence will live on through the people whose lives we touched. That's our legacy. So I feel, very grateful.
Well, I'm very grateful.
Thank you for this opportunity today, Dr. Rutledge. Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much. It was a real inspiration, really connected me with Easter Sunday, and just so much wonderful wisdom and everything that you've done. So I know Nicki may need to run right now. She has family members and so on to connect with, and we'll finish, Tim, with our meditation. So thank you again, Nicki. It was wonderful.
Hey, Tim, one last thing. You don't want to get stuck in too many Good Fridays.
Yeah.
That's true.
Back on the Good Fridays, you want to, that's why we have Easter, right?
Move on. Yeah,
Move
exactly.
on. Anyway, blessings to you both.
Blessings. Thank you.
Take care.
So if we could close with a sense of acknowledging Nicki and her articulate nature and all that she's given others. And contemplate for a moment that perspective that she read, or that we are able to love as much as we feel we are deserved to love, be loved. And we can carry that as a contemplation constantly by opening our hearts to more love, knowing that it's always available if we just simply open ourselves and love ourselves. Then the love of the divine and the infinite will flood in to that open space. Contemplating that, we can think of others who struggle with themselves, and we can wish them that they may open to that love. That we can all learn to receive what is already present. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Wonderful. Just want to extend out to anybody who's watching our podcast. Please send us your reflections, your questions, your ideas. You have somebody you like or would think would be a good guest, please send that to us. It's info@healingandcancer.org, or you can tweet us at healingNcancer. So thanks again, Tim. Wonderful to see and be with you again, and we'll see everybody next week. Take care.
Thanks for introducing me to Nicki. She's terrific.
Terrific indeed. Take care.
Bye-bye.